Mr. Craig Sleeman.
I feel
Craig,
like I'm,
how you doing, man?
you know, I feel like I'm at the Super Bowl halftime show with this gold microphone here. I don't know if this is pretty special seeing you guys up here with this bling. I don't know.
That's why we leave that there. That's the guest mic. We want the guests to feel really important, so we gave them the gold microphone.
I like it. Well, we've been following along all the way from Rochester. You guys have been doing a great job today. It was nice to see the following last night. Had a good show last night. Looking forward to a big weekend here in Niagara Falls.
Yeah, it's crazy. And, we've always done this show from our headquarters in Minnesota. And to be able to get here on the floor on the show, have people like Vince be able to join us, and just the whole world of this Great Lakes fishery actually seems to kind of descend in this area for the show. This is a show that's really focused on the things that we are talking about. So it was great to get here and just be able to talk to everybody. We've got the salmon and trout folks here. And we got a guy like you here, more into the walleye stuff, but I know you perch.
Yeah, we do a little bit of everything. We do a little bit of everything.
But you're an upstate New York guy. Just tell us about yourself and kind of what it's been like for you growing up in this area and the different things that you've done in your background.
Yeah, my twin brother Ethan and I got a very early start with our grandparents on Seneca Lake in the Finger Lakes. They had a houseboat. My grandfather fought in War II, landed on Omaha Beach as a Coast Guard captain. And, we kind of followed in his footsteps a little bit, and having some time on the water in the Finger Lakes was a blessing. It kept us busy in the summertime, and it kept us busy, learning new techniques and learning from, some of our elders. And, when they would come in with these big catches off the lake and put them out on the picnic table and, have a quote unquote hickey fry, we would, just be drooling at the mouth trying to get an opportunity to jump on their boat. And when they gave us a chance, we kind of, took liking to that, and we kind of built ourselves a little bit of a program. We started fishing, more post-college. We were big sports guys, back in college. Both my brother and I played lacrosse at a pretty high level, both All-Americans, and, actually got drafted by the Buffalo Bandits over here locally, but never kind of pursued the professional career and kind of turned that competition into fishing. Sure. And the cool thing is we had a backyard of the Finger Lakes and Lake Erie and Lake Ontario to do so, and so we kind of got our start there, and then things have kind of just springboarded here the last couple of years. Being a full-time art educator in Fairport, it's tough to get away on some of the school schedule. I had to duck out at ninth period a little early to get here, but the way that things are setting up is our summertime, we do have a little bit of extra time to work and play at the same time. So Ethan and I have really kind of pursued that fishing angle, and it's been going really well.
Yeah, we had Ed Stahusky on a little bit earlier, and Ed on tour with you. But last year was the first year that you really went all in on the tour. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, the cool thing about the National Walleye Tour last year is the championship was here in Dunkirk. And, having that big target on Dunkirk, New York, a place that you and I have actually fished together. And, I've held some different seminars here and I know a little bit more about the area. That was kind of the big goal in mind. And so my co-angler, Mike Urema, and I, we kind of put together a schedule where we could, work back and forth with each other. And he retired as a law enforcement officer over in Syracuse, and he committed to a full season. And that's really helpful, having a co-angler, be able to travel and cook meals and drive me to the airport so I could come back and work those days that I needed to, continue my real career. And, but having Dunkirk being the end all result for the championship was the big reason we fished the whole tour. And, fishing 3 out of the 4 places we had never been was the biggest challenge. Finding ways of catching fish in current on the Detroit River and, understanding concepts out in, Chamberlain, South Dakota, and then back to the muddy Mississippi and, learning barge, engagements with locks and timing and willow cats that sting you and make your arm go numb for a half an hour. And so, the challengers were really set. We really put ourselves up for failure, to begin with. But, with that hard work and the team like Ed Stahusky and Wayne Van Dyke, we had Mike Deffenbaugh for a while, and our great co-anglers like Brett Gilbertson, and we had some guys like Kurt Yoder and Mike, and we had a really great team aspect. And so we brought that past of working together as a team and put it together this year for the NWT. And, having a top 10 finish in your own home water is nothing but, confetti. And it's a special, feeling to have our crew here supporting that. And I couldn't have done it, obviously, with all of them. So it was a great experience.
Very cool. Well, the topic today, what we wanted to talk about was worming for walleyes on Lake Erie. And when you and I went fishing out of Dunkirk, that's what we were doing, and it was pretty darn productive. So kind of give people an overview on that.
Sure. I mean, worming on Lake Erie is, it goes hand in hand. I mean, it comes from the Western Basin, the guys like the Zarts and, the Ross Robertsons of the world. they're just unbelievable worm fishermen, and they taught us a lot. And the late Bob Henton also taught us a lot about pulling some really interesting ways and concepts with our clearing water. Coming from the west, that greener water that's a little bit more colored, it does change the game a little bit, and so you can get away with a little bit more out west. And so we feel like the Eastern Basin, bringing some of those tactics up here and learning from those guys really did help in our program. Especially 2017 we won the Sunset Bay Shootout, which is right now 150 to 200 boats, and it's 50 grand to win now, and it's it's become a real big tournament. And we won it on some structure over on the North Shore, and we were able to drive to Canada on 30 feet of water. And so we learned some tactics that really, worming was our way of making money. And, it's since changed quite a bit. The fish have diversified a little bit. The zebra mussels cleaned up the lake. The gobies have come into play a little bit more. We're ever changing with currents and, sea fleas now and, invasive species. And so things are changing, but we still, are worming quite often. We use a 1 ounce and 2 ounce inline weight that Mike Urimo over at Iowa Baits developed with us and kind of came up with a series of 6-foot leaders that, Ross had taught us how to tie. So we're taking all this information from other guys and kind of putting it to use. And so we pull a lot of worm harnesses like we did that one day with some inline spinners. And now we're doing a lot more with dipsy divers. A lot of our fish are deep. And, even in the championship, we were pulling dipsy divers that were, anywhere from 60 to 80 feet down over 90, 120, and so finding that thermocline, using our fish hawk, getting our temperature and our speed down, understanding where our equipment was. And those are all things that we'll talk about here this weekend. And, we were able to go out and put it hurting on them. We were catching 35, 40 fish in a 4 to 5 hour period, which gave us a selection that we were able to dig through and find some of those bigger fish. So, pulling worms on Lake Erie goes hand in hand with a lot of the old timers, but a lot of these new timers, I don't think they know what's good for them when it's the right temperature and the right speed. I mean, a low and slow program can sometimes get those bigger bites.
That's what I was going to interject there. Is I know how reluctant they are to fish worms on the east end here.
Yeah.
It's just been so good. And how do you attribute your success because you went to worms?
I think early on, that low and slow program, we were picking off fish and only catching maybe 10 to 12 fish a day. And now that the schools from Ohio, those great hatches in 15 and 16, and, all the talk from the DEC and the DNRs working together and tracking and understanding the populations, a lot of our mentality now is to go and pick through as many fish as possible. So that's why I think the crankbaits have taken over because it's a speed thing. At 2.5 miles an hour versus 1.5, you're covering twice as much distance. You're getting that extra mile per hour, which is going to cover and be over more fish. And, you can hopefully select those bigger fish out of there. But I think early on when we did go to those worms, it was one of those programs where we were keying on 3 or 4 fish on one rock. And if we made enough passes, we'd catch those 3 or 4 and we'd go to the next rock. And we'd catch those 3 or 4 and we could pick through those 7, 8, 9 pound fish on average, which would, obviously win any tournament on Lake Erie. If you get an 8 pound average, I mean, you're winning.
Sure. And so what was another old school tactic was tipping crankbaits with worms. Were you doing that?
In the championship, I can release that. Yes, I was. I was using a pinch crawler. I was pulling a lot of ripple and red fins. My buddy Rob, over at Wacom Tackle, Rob Crow's been great in painting some of the concepts. I've had, great guys from the Western Basin like NFP Customs and even the Walleye stuff. We pulled those for years.
What do you feel is an advantage to using worms compared to your crankbait program?
The live bait thing is unmatched. I mean, if a fish can smell that, it can see it. A worm is not imitating a night crawler that the fish are feeding on. There's no, 12-pack of Canadian crawlers running around the rocks and the fish are picking them off. I mean, this is an imitation bait. And even some of the best in the world have tried to imitate it in plastic, and they're doing a pretty good job. Our buddy Corey Sprengel over at Berkeley came out with a new crawler that's got a little bit of ribbon effect to it. It's a 7-inch and a 4-inch application that we've been kind of doing a little testing with. Finally got my hands on them, finally went on the market. But that imitation of that bait fish that's swimming, that dying action, anytime you can trigger a fish to bite, and then once he grabs that bait and feels that soft flesh, it's tough for him to let go compared to and you'll see it here in the tank. I mean, doing some of the seminars over at the Cleveland Boat Show, we saw, when they say the fish bite and won't let go, it's true. I mean, some of those plastics, they have those scents, and, some of that live bait is something those fish key on. And once they get that into their system, I think, it's tough to turn them off of it. So, yeah, I'd probably say that worms would be my number one. If I could fish a worm, throughout the entire country, that'd definitely be it.
There's a lot of people that are kind of adverse to it. They don't want to do it. So I guess that's the next question is, why wouldn't you want to do it?
It's tough. I mean, worms are dirty. So there's synthetics and things, boats cleans and, keeping a tight program. I know those are all, big parts of it. But, I would always have a 12-pack of worms on my boat either way. I mean, even with a jig, having a single jig with a worm or, going back to our Mississippi experience this year, live bait was the way we caught most of our fish. Now, was there a crankbait bite? Absolutely. Was there a jig bite? I'm sure. Other places. We just found that live bait, having a worm on board, just is also a confidence factor, understanding that if we're going to pitch it in and we're watching active target or we're looking at our sonar and there's a fish there, if he's not going to bite a worm, he's probably not going to eat anything, so again, a confidence factor as well.
Tell us a little bit about the harnesses you use on Lake Erie.
So I tie a 20 pound fluorocarbon. I use the Sunline FX and, or FC, excuse me. And I usually tie them with a treble. My first hook that I tie in is usually a 6. Sometimes I'll downsize to an 8. What I'm trying to keep is that action of the worm to keep it flowing. Some guys are actually using too big of a hook. And as I walk around the show and see some hooks, I just kind of put in my back pocket. Like, those are nice, but we're not catching salmon, right?
Right.
These worms still need that action. So I like to have a smaller hook on the back, but I'm also using a octopus 1/0 or a 1 size hook, about 4 inches, or I like to use my hand width. And so as you start to tie these things, you kind of come up with a measurement, but about a 6 to 8 foot leader, depending on how long your rods are. I don't like them going too far. And then again, any sort of bead pattern that you're comfortable with. Obviously, purple on Lake Erie is, notorious. I don't tie that many different color applications. I have a few perch related, some goby related, some whites, some purples and greens, but I don't overdo it when it comes to bead patterns. I'm really selective on my blades. Blades on Lake Erie, if we're fishing slow early season, I might even downsize to a 4 or 5. If the fisher, Jim Steele and I actually won a tournament over at the Conservation Club on New York. So we downsized our blades from 6s to 4s, and it made a big difference when the wind died. So I take more time, preparing my blades, not necessarily colors right away, but my size, the shape, and the action. Those are 3 big things for me before I even think about color. If a color does come up and, things are going well, and we start to catch some bigger fish or some fish are keying in on that, we'll then switch over. But I always like to start with my bead patterns first because that's the most consistent. Then I'll go to my blade size, blade action, and then obviously, depending on my speeds, I'll change my blades accordingly.
Can you talk about that a little bit? What's the difference between the blades and what that harness is going to do when you start changing shapes?
Absolutely. Usually I start out with a small Colorado blade, a 4 to 6. 5's kind of that middle of the road. 6 is pretty large. 4 is a little small, but that Colorado blade is kind of like that teardrop shaped blade that has a nice little thump to it. When I'm pulling a lot slower, I might even grab, a Dutch fork plastic or poly blade that's going to be even lighter. So in any little current or any little motion, even at 0.8 to 1.2, I might pull that blade slower just to get some action to make it look like a swimming fish. From there, I might move up into a larger Colorado. Again, I'm not afraid to pull those blades even at 2 miles an hour on my dipsies. I know that I'm going 2 miles an hour down where my baits are because I'm, again, using my fish hawk. And that could mean, currents are changing. My water temperature is raised. So I might increase my size and bait fish. If I see that these fish are kicking out, larger perch or larger shad, or even this year we found them eating sheephead, I might bump up my blade size based on bait. And then last but not least, obviously one of my favorites is the willow. Higher speeds, 2.2 to 2.5, pulling them on my dipsies, maybe even throw an ITOI fly on there or something to give them a little more flash. But I'm a big proponent on those dipsies that run on those big willow blades.
So when I went with you, we ran a lot of lead core. You're telling me now you're kind of more transitioning towards the dipsies. How are you covering that water column?
Yeah, so, the lead core is just, it's an animal. It's a tool. It works in certain applications. There's certain days that those fish want that bait further away from the boat, or they want that undulation of that lead core and what it's producing and providing. But, we were talking efficiencies in this championship. And so, having 2 dipsy divers where I could easily let out 60, 80, 100 feet very quickly and have a rod in hand and not have to grab a board, pull in my 10 colors of lead, finally get to the fish, put it back out. I wasn't cycling fish to my liking fast enough. Mm-hmm. And so the dipsies were a great way, to understand, not only where the fish were in that water column, because I would target them, obviously 3 to 5 feet, maybe above them, and have them come up and hit it. But I could drive faster and turn quicker. So as soon as I had a school going, it wasn't like I had to go reel all of those big boards in with 300 lines out, grab, turn it. I had those dipsies in and we could really work efficiently.
So less is more.
In this case, and that even goes back to some of my salmon days. I used to, work with a couple guys as a deckhand back in the college days. And, I went out with Matt Leblonsky and he was on here the other day. And it's like, 4 rods is all he needs to catch 16 fish in 20 minutes. I mean, the guy understands that. And I think less is more. Having a few less rods to manage, you can also monitor them. If you get a junk fish, a white bass, a sheephead, you can take care of it quickly, get your bait fishing, as fast as possible. So I think it's definitely an efficient way of fishing.
Are you running traditional diver lengths, or are you running slide divers?
Again, some of the local guys took me into another dimension by adding a trick to it. Specifically, I actually take my Dipsy diver and I grab one of the OR16 red clips from Offshore Tackle, and I make my own slide diver. With the bite that the walleyes have compared to a salmon is not as violent. And I feel like, as I can control that length, some days they want it 30 feet away, like a slide diver would be. Mm-hmm. Some days they want it 6 feet away. The other thing is just efficiency when netting a fish with a Dipsy diver.
Sure.
If you have a 6 to 10 foot leader and whoever's handling the net can't get to the back of the boat to scoop that while the other guy's in the front of the net, or in front of the boat, with that Dipsy diver dangling from his rod tip, I just find it easier to disengage that clipped on Dipsy diver, set it in the boat, and then it's just them and the fish for the next 30 feet. And so we've developed a little bit. We've got that going to be in our school this weekend. But that came from Jim Steele over at Innovative Outdoors. He taught us that years ago right here at this clinic when I was just a young pup learning how to fish.
Yeah, that's cool. And now you're teaching in the walleye school.
Yeah, and I don't want to say I stole that tactic, but it's been working so well. And I always reference that he taught me that years ago. And now we're teaching the big Eastern Basin Walleye School. We got Ali Shakur and Donnie Rupert and Lance Valentine's put together quite the curriculum. And I'm excited to go, check out the room and get started tonight from 6 to 8. We got our little social, and it's just something that I've always dreamed of doing, is passing on, a little bit of information that we've collected over the years so we can help someone else beat the fish. And that was, something that I took this year is everyone's like, well, you didn't beat this guy or you didn't beat that guy. And it's like, well, okay, guys, we're not out to beat each other. We're here to beat the fish.
That's exactly right.
And we learned that from Bob Henton, who's since passed this last April. And, he taught us so much about, hey, did you get those fish today? And I'm like, well, yeah, we got them. Well, how good did you get them? And that was the question, rather than, well, did you go over and did you beat Jimmy? Or did you beat Chris? Did you beat Donnie? No, it wasn't about who did you beat. It was, did you beat the fish better than us? And so I think as a fishing community, we have to go back and remember, with all the things that are going on in the world, it's not us against each other. It's us against the fish,
For sure.
So one of the things that you use on your boat, and, we're here with a bunch of salmon guys, and the salmon guys are using the X4, X4D.
Yep.
But one of the tools you use on your boat, I think this is something that if people are watching that are just kind of getting started, or maybe they've got a multi-species boat, is the X2. So can you talk about how that X2 works into your game when you're out on Lake Erie?
Yeah, with that portability of the X2, it's great because I'm able to take that application of the probe. I can put it with I actually use a Torpedo 12-ounce muskie weight because it tracks really nicely. And so I'll throw that on the bottom of my probe, and I'll actually use my short rod that I got right from Fish Hawk. And the nice thing about it, it's up away from everything that's in the back. Because I'm netting fish and because I'm fishing, everything towards the back, my unit is portable, where I can actually put, the transducer and the probe right in the water, right at the cockpit of the captain. So, running the boat, having a crew of 2 or 3 guys, depending on, who's in our boat, I'm able to monitor. I can see that screen. I know what my temperature is. I know what my speed is. And so having that portability, I can move it. I can change it. I can rip it up, as fast as I can. It's not stuck, and I don't have to run a downrigger. And so that's the cool thing about our Ranger 621 is we don't have a downrigger. Are they nice to have? They're great for salmon. Some guys do really well with them on the walleye world. But for us, because I'm kind of a run and gun fishing captain, and I love that transferability of going from one spot to another very quickly and being efficient, having that X2 has really changed the game.
So you've got that information, but when you're out on the Mississippi River where you're not going to use it, it's out of your way. You don't have to worry about, hitting the deucer somewhere. You don't have to worry about having that display on your console. You just take it right off.
Exactly. And if you're a guy that's going to go and explore new places and new lakes, and you're able to just monitor and adjust based on the depth, I can even see that weight and see that probe on my graph because I do have a through hull transducer. I'm constantly monitoring that line to make sure that I'm not in structure, not in rocks. And it's been astronomical to find the actual difference of current. The shallower I get, the more current sometimes I'm finding. You're like, well, that's a deep water application. You can't start that thing till 50 feet down. and I found 30 feet in sometimes has more current than 50 feet does.
Right.
And so that's also taught me a little bit more about paying attention to speeds and lure speeds, especially when we're after those big fish shallow with our worms.
Vince, you have anything for Craig?
I think it's been fascinating, the similarities in the tournament game. I mean, for sure, it is you against the fish, and then the cream will rise at the top, and you fall where you do. But it is a competition against the fish, and every day. I mean, and that's what it is. And sounds very similar. As soon as you think you know it all, you get humbled. I mean, you're always learning. And these fish only survive because they adapt and change. So it's a beautiful thing, man. So when you were talking about the Finger Lakes, you were walleye fishing?
There's a few walleyes around with Honeyway Lake.
Yep.
Home of Doc's Tackle, one of our big sponsors over here that's at the show. I mean, great walleye fishing in there. It's actually gotten better over the last couple of years. Working your way over to, actually, there's a little problem over at Skinny Atlas. Someone had released some walleyes, and the DEC has said there's really, no limit time of year. So we don't know what's going on over there, but some great walleyes to be caught there. Otisco's got some great weedy walleyes.
Mm-hmm.
But Cuca's unfortunately found 5 or 6 here in the last couple of years. Have kind of leaked into our Cuca Lake, but definitely not in Seneca. Haven't seen many, although I did hear there's some on the south end of Cayuga. So, but there's a few around. But if we're going to travel, it's an hour and a half either Oneida or an hour and a half over here at Buffalo.
So growing up, I was very young when I got in the salmon game, but we always heard Canisius had big fish, but very, very challenging.
So, it's funny to see them spawn in the springtime at the south end and get all the videos. The guys are like, well, why aren't you fishing Canisius? They're a tough tiger to tame over there. They can be caught. There were a few night tournaments that I participated a few years back in May, and some guys came up with some wallop 8-9 pounders, and I know some guys that have caught some. I tend not to target that lake as much, just with my time frame of schedule, but that's definitely a place I'd like to explore a little bit more.
Still alewives in there?
Yes, there are. Yep, a lot of tiger muskies, a lot of big smallmouth, a lot of big largemouth as well.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So good stuff, Craig. If people want to learn more about you or find out or get in touch with you, how do they do it?
Sure. I'm on Instagram at Craig Sleeman Fishing and also on Facebook. You can look us up there and shoot us a message. We'd love to answer any questions about products, about the X2.
You're a teacher, so you know how to teach. So if somebody wants to learn how to do this, you're a good guy to go out with.
Yeah, it'd be awesome. I've set up quite a few educational tours already this year, and we even sold a gift certificate for Christmas this winter, and on 2 lessons with a couple different captains. So we're putting together a nice little package, and I'm just tickled to death to be here with Lance and Ali, because I think they bring the game when it comes to really teaching fishing. So I'm really looking forward to hanging out with them this weekend.
I just want to thank everybody for watching today, and if you're listening on the podcast later on, we'll be putting these segments out on the podcast throughout the year. We'll chop up these videos as well and put them on YouTube. So a lot of new stuff coming out of the show. Just appreciate everybody joining us, and especially appreciate our guests for taking time out and hanging out with us and sharing your information.